The significance of the Enterprise in maritime operations. What made the Enterprise so crucial? To appreciate this, we need to delve into maritime operations. The Enterprise was an aircraft carrier, a colossal warship that effectively functioned as a floating airfield. When it was constructed in the late 1930s, it was only the sixth such ship ever constructed by the United States Navy. At that moment in maritime history, carriers were regarded as support ships within the battle formation. World War I, years previously, had demonstrated that battleships were the principal components of a battle group. Aircraft carriers, with their planes, could certainly increase the range of surveillance for a task force and provide strong defensive coverage, but there was a common view that aircraft couldn't destroy a battleship. At least, that was the opinion at the time. Across the globe in November 1940, the British Royal Navy successfully attacked a group of Italian warships while they were anchored, employing aircraft-launched torpedoes. This remarkable amount of destruction drew the attention of a particular person, the Japanese Imperial Navy's Commander-in-Chief, Isoroku Yamamoto. Having studied at Harvard and previously serving as the naval attaché at the Japanese embassy in Washington, Admiral Yamamoto was fully aware that a conflict with the United States would be nearly unwinnable. Most of Japan's oil was sourced from America, and the USA was already uneasy with Japanese expansion in the Pacific. Furthermore, oil-rich Indonesia was a sensitive region, especially with a strong US presence in the Philippines. The only path Yamamoto saw for securing a Japanese triumph in the Pacific was by delivering a catastrophic blow to the American Pacific Fleet, while at the same moment advancing into Indonesia and the Philippines in order to guarantee access to oil. Such a surprise assault would have been impossible, employing traditional naval strategies. He now recognized that aircraft carriers would form the cutting edge of a surprise attack. Yamamoto insisted that carriers must be the principal objective at Pearl Harbor. It was essential to destroy the greatest asset that the U.S. Navy hadn't even recognized it possessed. Yamamoto's combined task force made its way toward Hawaii with 6 aircraft carriers in the closing days of November 1941. Meanwhile, U.S. intelligence suspected an attack might be underway, but certainly not at their main base, Pearl Harbor. At that moment, there were a total of 3 aircraft carriers within their Pacific forces, with the USS Enterprise as one of them. Her task group was scheduled to return to Pearl Harbor by the afternoon of December 6th, following a delivery of aircraft and equipment to Wake Island, roughly 2,300 miles west of Pearl. The 2 other carriers, Lexington and Saratoga, were engaged in separate escort operations, keeping them at a distance from the base, while the Enterprise's formations made their way back toward Pearl. Simultaneously, the Japanese Armada was advancing from the north, closing in from approximately 4,000 miles away. Pacific atmospheric conditions. On their passage, both of these formations would confront a shared adversary, Mother Nature. To the northeast of Hawaii lies the infamous high-pressure zone called the North Pacific High. Its persistent influence generates the trade winds, which travel from the U.S. West Coast across the Hawaiian Islands during the colder months. Usually, it is less potent or nearly absent. Yet, in the opening days of December 1941, it was exceptionally strong for that time of year. As the Japanese Combined Task Force pressed eastward from the north of Japan, they were trailed by a powerful low-pressure system. While this made conditions arduous for the crews aboard, this atmospheric disturbance would enable the Japanese Armada to remain concealed by clouds and heavy seas. Aircraft or submarines engaged in surveillance would be unable to detect their formation, which was roughly 1,000 miles to their south. The Enterprise and its escort ships were experiencing the effects stemming from the collision of a blocking high-pressure area and a strong low-pressure system. This substantial pressure contrast resulted in a significant movement of air from high to low. Surface winds grew much faster, which in turn produced enormous waves on the open ocean. The Enterprise, exceeding 800 feet in length, was able to cope with the difficult seas reasonably well, but its accompanying destroyers were repeatedly pounded by the waves. Continuous strong winds drained their fuel much faster, requiring the Enterprise to ease its speed in order to refuel its escort ships. It became apparent to Vice Admiral Bull Halsey that the group would not be able to reach Pearl Harbor by their originally scheduled return date, the assault on Pearl Harbor. While the crew members of the task force would be disheartened that their shore liberty was interrupted, the turbulent waters of December 5th and 6th kept them from a near certain demise. On the morning of December 7th, 230 miles north of Pearl Harbor, Japanese aircraft engines revved to life on the decks of 6 carriers. Once the warplanes broke through the clouds, they were met by the rising red sun, a perfect symbol for how the day was about to proceed. The Japanese attack formations made their way toward Pearl and were greeted by skies that were somewhat clear. The North Pacific High had kept thick clouds away from Hawaii. They began their assault on the U.S. Navy's anchorage, with numerous battleships, cruisers, and destroyers coming under fire by Japanese attack planes. Conspicuously missing were the American aircraft carriers. The USS Enterprise and her escort group remained 150 miles outside of Pearl Harbor. The United States was now at war. When Enterprise eventually arrived at port on the evening of December 8th, Admiral Halsey, the Navy's most outspoken proponent for aircraft carriers, vowed to carry the battle back to the Japanese as he gazed upon Pearl Harbor still smoldering. The attack had opened the eyes of the rest of the U.S. Navy, although the majority of their battleships had been lost. Carrier operations. During 1942, a significant strike against the Pacific Fleet. It is now apparent that aircraft carriers are the principal fleet asset as the conflict moves forward, and the U.S. is left with only 3, while Japan maintains 10. In the subsequent weeks, the carriers Yorktown and Wasp are transferred from the Atlantic, and the recently constructed Hornet is rushed into service in 1942. Encounters between Japanese and American formations were predominantly focused on eliminating each other's carriers. The Lexington was destroyed in May during the Battle of the Coral Sea. In June, the well-known Battle of Midway resulted in the U.S. sinking 4 of the 6 Japanese carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor, but at the expense of losing the Yorktown. Some say Midway was the turning point of the Pacific conflict, but that's not the whole picture. This view would be challenged by numerous naval battles that followed in the Guadalcanal campaign's latter half of 1942. The Saratoga was badly injured, and the Wasp fell victim to submarine torpedoes. Meanwhile, the continental United States was still attempting to gather its industrial resources in order to construct additional carriers, but the lingering effects of the Great Depression kept shipyards from operating at full capacity. This left the Enterprise and Hornet as the Pacific's last 2 carriers to continue the battle. Surrender at Guadalcanal was not an option. The base there offered a perfect opportunity for Japanese forces to threaten Australia and profoundly alter the course of the Pacific conflict. In late October 1942, the Enterprise and Hornet engaged the Japanese carrier group near the Santa Cruz Islands. Once again, Mother Nature came to the Enterprise's aid, as a tropical rain squall obscured her from the first attack wave. Her sister ship was not as fortunate. The Hornet was struck by multiple bombs, torpedoes, and kamikaze attacks. The Enterprise was hit by a subsequent attack, but ultimately remained in service. The last battle-ready carrier in the Pacific. At the height of the Guadalcanal campaign, the Enterprise's aircraft destroyed crucial Japanese resupply ships, attempting to reinforce their soldiers on the island, and thereby kept the Marines from being forced off Guadalcanal. Had the Enterprise been lost at that moment, the course of the Pacific conflict might have been completely different. Alternate scenario: Pearl Harbor nearly a year earlier, the conflict in the Pacific would have taken a completely different path. Enterprise's participation at Midway was essential in sinking the 4 Japanese carriers. If the Enterprise had been absent from the Midway showdown, the United States would likely have lost both Hornet and Yorktown. This would have left Japanese carrier forces with a 5-to-1 advantage, practically assuring a Japanese triumph at Guadalcanal and clearing the way for a potential invasion of Australia. It's impossible to say for certain that this would have resulted in a Japanese eventual domination of the Pacific conflict, but it certainly would have delayed the Allies' progress by several years. If the chain reaction stemming from the Enterprise's destruction at Pearl Harbor had come to pass, the heavy seas of early December 1941, while undeniably an annoyance, ultimately preserved the Pacific conflict for the United States and its allies.